And the Philistines put themselves in array against Israel. And when they joined battle, Israel was smitten before the Philistines. And they slew of the army in the field about 4,000 men. And when the people were come into camp, the elders of Israel said, Wherefore hath the Lord smitten us today before the Philistines? Let us fetch the ark of the covenant of the Lord out of Shiloh unto us, that when it cometh among us, it may save us out of the hand of our enemies. So the people went out to Shiloh, that they might bring from thence the ark of the covenant of the Lord of hosts, which dwelleth between the cherubims. And the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, were there with the ark of the covenant of God. And when the ark of the covenant of the Lord came into the camp, all Israel shouted with a great shout, so that the earth rang again. And when the Philistines heard the noise of the shout, they said, What meaneth the noise of this great shout in the camp of the Hebrews? And they understood that the ark of the Lord was come into the camp. And the Philistines were afraid. For they said, God is come into the camp. And they said, Woe unto us! For there hath not been such a thing heretofore. Woe unto us! Who shall deliver us out of the hand of these mighty gods? These are the gods that smote the Egyptians with all the plagues in the wilderness. Be strong and quit yourselves like men, O ye Philistines, that ye be not servants unto the Hebrews as they have been to you. Quit yourselves like men and fight. And the Philistines fought, and Israel was smitten. And they fled every man into his tent. And there was a very great slaughter, for there fell of Israel 30,000 footmen. And the ark of God was taken. And the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, were slain. Heavenly Father, in the name of Jesus, we ask that you bless your word, bless our delivering your word, bless your people, that they may be hearers and doers of your word. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Now this is a peculiar thing that happened here. Because I have to go back and explain to you a few things. So why would they lose this battle and had the Ark of the Covenant with them, which represents the presence of God? So therefore they were thinking they had God on their side. But what we have to do is go back a little further and figure out what was going on that caused the Ark of the Covenant to be of non-effect. Right. And what you have to understand is these two people called Hophni and Phinehas, they were Eli's son, and they worked in the temple with Eli. Eli allowed them to become priests, and as priests they would take up the offering. But one of the things they did with the meat offering is they were supposed to grab it, fry it, put it in boiled water, and then you stick your fork in it, and what comes up, the priest could have. So he had to stick his fork in there. He didn't know what he was getting. And then he would pull it out, and that would be his meat for him to live on. And that's how the priest got fed. But what happened is that Hophni and Phinehas said, oh no, we're not doing it that way. You come up there with your raw meat getting ready to sacrifice it, and they say, give me that. So they was taking the best that there was and taking it before it could even be sacrificed to God. And when people would look at them and say, no, you can't do that, they would threaten them and say, we'll take it by force. So they were messing with God's offering. I tell you right now, don't mess with God's offering. And then the second thing they were doing is they were sleeping with the women at the gate. So they was committing two big old sins that God was very angry about. He even came and talked to Eli about it and told Eli, this thing cannot be going on in my house. I am angry with your family. As a matter of fact, if this keep up, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to make sure that there's not an old man left in your family. That means everybody that's born of Eli and his family gonna die early. And God let him know that. Eli still didn't do nothing to correct his son. He went and talked to him a little bit and said, look, y'all can't be doing that. Y'all need to cut that out. And they looked at him, old man, they went and did what they wanted to do. And so we also read here that these are the two that are getting ready to go into battle. So now we have two crooked priests that don't even recognize that God is not in their midst. And then it says right here that tripped me out, it says not only about Eli and Phinehas, it says, and when the people were come into the camp, the elders. So now we got another group of people that wasn't even paying attention. The elders of Israel said, wherefore hath the Lord smitten us this day before the Philistines? Let us fetch the ark of the covenant. Now the elders, who are supposed to be overseers and looking at everything and making sure everything is going good, they looked at and they didn't even notice that the presence of God was not there. So that lets you know that the elders weren't doing everything they were supposed to do. So now we have Eli, which sit over everybody. He wasn't doing like he's supposed to do. He had the two priests in the house. They weren't doing what they're supposed to do. And then you had the elders, which were supposed to be looking over the congregation, and they weren't supposed to be. They weren't doing what they're supposed to be doing. So we have a whole situation here where everything is messed up. So now we get into the thing about symbol and symbolism. I'm going to be honest with you. This is symbolism. Because for it to be effective, I have to wear it. But I'm wearing it as symbolism. People do that with their Bibles. You'll see people walking around with their Bible. They don't even read it. They're just carrying it. It's a symbol unto them. It's a representation of what they want people to believe and to think who they are. They'll even toss it in their window of their car. Now that means they ain't read it during the week because it's in the window of their car. It is nothing but symbolism. There's no power in it if they're not reading it or believing it. So therefore, if you don't believe it, there's no power in it. If you're not using it and reading it, you're not being edified and glorified within yourself when you can move to a higher ground, a greater understanding, and a greater relationship with God. All that is being missed because we're worried about symbolism. We're worried about what people are going to think, how they view us, how they look at us, how they perceive us. So we have a situation here. They go into battle. Now that they done committed all these sins before God, the glory of God is no longer there. And now that the glory of God is no longer there, they have grabbed the Ark of the Covenant and they're marching into the battle because they're remembering what the Ark of the Covenant represented when God was there when they fought before. Because the Ark of the Covenant was there when they fought all these other people and when they crossed over the Jordan and all these other things. And so they remember that the Ark of the Covenant brought them blessing. But they're missing the point. The Ark of the Covenant was a representation of God. And when they were living right, God was right there in the place.
Thank you, Jesus.
Then they missed another thing. Outside of the veil, there's a lampstand that's supposed to remain lit all night to morning. It said when Eli laid down, he went out. It wasn't supposed to. It seemed like the other people, the elders, should have recognized and looked and said, wait a minute.
That's right.
The light that's supposed to be on, that's supposed to remain on all night is now off. The light went out. God's glory has left the place. But they didn't even pay attention to recognize that God's glory has left the place. And so now they're getting ready to go into battle and they're carrying a symbol which God's presence, if it's there, has a lot of power. But it's not that the ark has the power. It's just the fact that the presence of God being there is the power. But if the presence of God has left the vicinity and left the area, then there is no power. So therefore, Shiloh no longer has God's glory.
My God, Jesus.
And that's what they didn't realize. God's glory has departed. They have lost that situation. And that's what happened to them. And so now they go into battle carrying the Ark of the Covenant. And everybody's cheering and yelling at everything and going out in a great roar because they see the covenant, which is now of non-effect. It is just a symbol that has no power because they stripped it of its power when they began to sin in God's presence. And since they decided to sin in front of God and nothing was done about it, go out to battle. It's like us talking about we're going to lay hands on somebody and we're not prayed up or living right. We're going to lay hands on them and then we wrapped up into their situation and then it's all on us too. Because we haven't done what God has instructed us to do. Even Paul tells us to be careful of laying hands on people. You better make sure that you laid up right, that you're all prayed up and living like God has instructed you to do. Making sure that you're on a good foundation before you take that step to do that. And so we have this situation where these people are lost and they're going into battle and they're going to lose their lives. 30,000 people are going to die just for the fact that these priests and elders did not pay attention and was living in a filthy way. It was not being loved. And then they look at God because he is now angry. Because he told Eli that an old man will be in your house. Because of the destruction that is about to fall on Israel. And so we have a situation where they grab the Ark of the Covenant and they're going out. Because remember, the first time they went out to battle and 5,000 men died. And so now they take the Ark of the Covenant with them the second time. They look and they said, you know, like people playing football or basketball. They said, I need some more juice, so they'll drink Gatorade. They get a little bit more filling. So they think they add more energy to them. And so they grabbed the Ark of the Covenant because they figured they had some more juice with them. Where now we can take care of these Philistines. Where now we have the ability to slay them. And so they grabbed the Ark of the Covenant. And they had the priests Hophni and Phinehas carry it. So now you have two filthy-minded, filthy-acting people who have denied God and been disobedient and committing all manner of sin. And now those two people are carrying the Ark of the Covenant. First thing to do, the priests are supposed to sanctify themselves. They're supposed to be holy and righteous before they even touch the covenant. The Ark of the Covenant. So here they are picking up the Ark, and you got these two filthy people carrying the Ark into battle. The battle was lost before they even got there. And they didn't even realize it. But I tell you, if the elders had paid attention, they would have noticed that the light went out. But they didn't even pay attention to that. And they knew what Hophni and Phinehas was doing. So they were ignoring what the priests were doing. And so this was not a secret. The people knew how dirty they were. And so now they go into battle. And the funny thing to me is when they go into battle, and Hophni and Phinehas had the nerve to think that this is a great thing, and they're walking all prideful and everything. But they were too blind to see that even their lives was going to be lost. Because when they went in the second battle, 30,000 died plus Hophni and Phinehas. So they killed the two priests too. And they took their Ark of the Covenant. Killed the priests and took it with them. And one of the men from the tribe of Benjamin come running back, yelling. Eli grabbed him. What's this noise? What's going on? And he said, your son, Hophni and Phinehas, died. And he was sad. But then they told him, and the Ark of the Covenant was taken. Then he fell backwards and died. You understand what's happened right there? His two sons were dead. And he was sad. But when the Ark of the Covenant was taken, he now understood that the glory of God is no longer there. And he knew without the glory of God, they are lost and doomed. Then he fell back and died. And then his daughter-in-law was in pain because they told her that her husband had died. And she was giving birth. She gave birth. She named the child Ichabod. God's glory is gone. No longer there. That's what that child represented. And then she lay down and just died. Because they had an understanding with all the dirt was going on. They had an understanding without God's glory, without God's presence, without God's anointing. We are some lost folks who don't stand a chance of winning anything, accomplishing anything, being successful, being able to take charge, being able to run this thing, being able to fight this battle. They understood that. He looked, we gonna take that Ark of the Covenant. They get in the back. They fight with the Philistines. They get that back. Now they got control of it. And they come back in. Well, actually, Saul did, because they give him Saul because all the problems give it to the people they get back. But then David wanted to bring it into the house. King David wanted to bring it into Jerusalem. And now he wants to bring it into Jerusalem. And now because he's king and he wants to bring it there into the temple that he has prepared. And so he wants to bring it into that temple. But while he's got it and everything, there was rules that they had to go by with this Ark of the Covenant that God had laid down. First of all, the priests again need to be sanctified. They need to get themselves right and prayed up and make sure their garments are right and they're walking right. And this ain't a Russian thing. When you're carrying God's Ark of the Covenant, you would take your time and y'all were walking together and doing your walk with the thing. Nobody putting it on no cart. And so we have a situation now. David now got the Ark of the Covenant. And he decided they won't bring it in. And now they all gathered together and David's bringing it in and they got it on the cart and everything and it's getting ready to fall off the cart. And as you know, and you know, this is an important lesson because a lot of times, especially with teenagers, they'll say, well, what I was doing was right, but it wasn't for you to do. And it wasn't your position to do it. Come on. You need to stay in your place. And so when the ark was about to fall off, the fella reached up to touch it to push it back on the cart. He dropped dead. Why? Because the priests were the only ones that was authorized to touch the cart. Right. To touch the ark. And so he messed around and touched it, cost him his life. He died trying to do good, but it wasn't for him to do. Jesus. You have to recognize what your position is. David looked. David said, wait a minute. All the wrong David did, he had enough discernment to recognize something ain't right. He said, we need to go back. We need to draw this thing up. We need to go back and read the scripture and see what it says we're supposed to be doing. We ain't doing something right. So they try to figure out, where can we take this thing? I love this name, Obed-Edom. I like that man. He was in the right place at the right time and received a great blessing. The opportunity presented itself to him because he had a good reputation and he was at the right place that wasn't too far away. That reputation carried him a long way. That's why I tell people, a lot of times attitude will carry you further than aptitude. He may not have been the smartest man, but he had a good attitude where they looked, we can take it to his house. And they took the Ark of the Covenant on over to his house. Let me tell you, when they took it to his house, everybody looked and said, all right, yeah, that's a good idea. We're going to take it to Obed-Edom's house. Now, the thing that happened with Obed-Edom's house is after it was there for a while, what you call the Ark of the Covenant and everything, it was there, and God honored Obed-Edom. And since he honored Obed-Edom, blessings began to flow out of his house.
Amen. Yes, yes.
See, just because the Ark of the Covenant was there does not mean he was going to get a blessing. That's just a symbol. But because the Ark of the Covenant was there and he respected it and he was an honorable man of God, now he received the blessings and God was pouring it upon his house. So you have to understand, a lot of times we'll think that I should get blessed because I walked into the house of the Lord. But you have to understand, first off, first thing first, you got to make sure that you know who God is and that you make contact with God. Because if you're not living righteous, the only blessing you can receive is salvation. And if you're not getting that salvation, then you're just a tinkling sound, a brass sound that's in the wind that means nothing, that's just a bunch of noise. So therefore, you got to make sure that you're living as God has instructed us to live. Thank you, Lord. Jesus. The old baby, he's in his house. Then the word get out. And they tell David, I think the ark is ready. So what's going on? Obed-Edom. Everybody in his household is getting blessed. I like that. Everybody in your house. Because you're living right, all the blessings are starting to fall on everybody in the house. They think that they're just coming that way and they don't understand understand there is a time for us to bring things into the house of the Lord and to be obedient unto the Lord and to behave as the Lord has instructed us to. I love getting blessed by the Lord. But you have to be obedient to the Lord. You have to do what He is asking you to do. We can't live in sin and think that it's okay and that He's going to bless us. We have to remember, He is not fooled. He sees everything we do. So the only person we're fooling is ourselves. We can't fake it and think He's going to deliver us. He knows, He sees. And we can sit there and trying to do these things and living in sin and doing these little slack things on the side and everything. And then we can sit there and act like we can't figure out why there's nothing but chaos all in our household and in our lives.
Help somebody.
We must be obedient to the Lord. Don't you just want to be blessed, but you got to be obedient to the Lord. I didn't even say you got to be obedient to the pastor. I said be obedient to the Lord. I can't get you into heaven at all. I can't even stand before, well, let me tell you, she really tried everything. I don't even get to say, I'm too busy worrying about my own soul salvation. I'm trying to make it to the gate myself. I can't take you to heaven with me. I'm trying everything I can within me to get there. So everybody has an accountability to themselves. The only thing God holds me accountable for is telling you. That's what He looks at. He can even tell you the date and time. You sit there and try and plan what nobody told me. He said, let me tell you, that little elder down there, he told you this day on Sunday at this time. And you sitting there texting on your phone. He knows. He keeps up. He knows all. And we're not fooling Him. Holiness is right. And we must be holy. Because our Lord God is holy. Be blessed in the Lord. Under His salvation. And living your life. Receive the blessings of the Lord. When there's a drought in the land, even the blessed of the Lord goes through the drought. But God blesses them along the way. If there's a drought and nobody can get water, they might go by this one house. And they say, why they got water? Because God is looking out for them.
Yes, He is.
He's receiving that blessing. God provides for His people. And as I always say, if I die on the battlefield, the Bible tells me, absent from the body, present with the Lord. And if you have to die, the best way to die is on the battlefield. Fight for the Lord. God bless each and every one of us. First lady.